Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. We're talking about the French President Francois Hollande's visit to Havana, first by a Western leader since 1986. We're in the company of Axel Gliden, a co-author of The Double Life of Fidel Castro, where you say that under his communist veneer, he enjoys the good things in life.
Well, this book was written with the former bodyguard of Fidel Castro, who was his personal bodyguard, the top one bodyguard between 77 to 94. And he shared his life during the last, at least, in a very top position. He was a colonel of intelligence. He organized the trip overseas. He also made sure the security around Fidel was perfect. And the thing was, he was traveling and going everywhere Fidel was going, including Fidel Castro's private island. Because the funny thing with all the stories that are in this book that's going to be released tomorrow in New York and in the US is that, Fidel always claimed he was a very humble and simple man who had a small barrack by the seashore. And actually he has an island, a cay, 15 kilometers south of Bay of Pigs, and ironically, this was elected as a secondary house by Fidel after the failed invasion of Bay of Pigs. He went to visit the region with a fisherman who showed him this island, and he fell in love with this place, and he had a house built there, a second house for the guests, amongst which Gabriel Garcia Marquez was very often in this place. There is a nice swimming pool, and the most incredible thing is that there was also a dolphinarium, and there is, you can still see it on Google, a dolphinarium and a turtle farm. So it's not, you shouldn't see Fidel Castro as something having a lavish lifestyle like a Berlusconi or someone like this, but more like an old rural aristocrat, enjoying good things, not luxury things, but with a very good taste, the best things, and of course with no comparison with what the normal people are experiencing and living in Cuba in the last 50 years.
With the ordinary
and especially in the last 25 years, actually.
All right, that brings us to another issue which we've been talking about, which is, of course, the relative power, and thus we see the soft power of Cuba is big. We're also in the company, by the way, of Christophe Ventura, who collaborates with the left-leaning journal Mémoires de Lutte, Memories of Struggle, and is the author of The Awakening of a Continent, published in French. He's a former UMP candidate to represent the French abroad in the French Parliament in that area. Pascal Drouot, who's a business analyst, and Frédéric Martel, journalist, and who collaborated with SMART, which book researched internet around the world. We were talking there about the influence. We're talking in part one of our discussion about everything that France has to offer. How about a look at all that Cuba needs? Well, Luc Schrago has the story.
7 years of reform since Raúl Castro came to power, and 7 years that Cuba's once moribund economy has been showing signs of life. The Caribbean island nation's leader authorized the use of mobile phones in 2008, easing up on certain internet restrictions 4 years later. Other reforms included creating both property and vehicle markets in 2011, a new law on foreign investment in 2014, and increasing decentralization from Havana this year. A 2012 estimate put Cuba's GDP at $70 billion, making it the Caribbean's largest economy. However, 50 years of a United States-enforced embargo has left it weaker than most, a situation not helped by management from an all-powerful and ever-present communist state. An anemic private sector has been largely funded by remittances from the Cuban diaspora, totaling up to $2.8 billion a year. But market economic principles are taking root. Public enterprises control key sectors like medical and training services. Their export netted Cuba a neat $8 billion last year, with some 50,000 Cuban volunteers present in 60 countries worldwide. Tourism isn't to be underestimated either. 3 million travelers visited in 2014, bringing hard currency with them. After the contractions of recent years, Havana's now looking at 4% economic growth in 2015. Despite such changes, one question still remains. just how much the state will want to keep its hand on the economic tiller in years to come.
And key to that, we were alluding to it in part one of our discussion, Frédéric Martel, is the internet. How much will internet be opened up?
For now, the situation is pretty difficult to analyze. First of all, you have a cable, a submarine cable with Venezuela, so which means that internet is available theoretically on the island. And it's true that you can get internet pretty easily, of course, in a 5-star hotel for €10 an hour, which is extremely expensive, about half a month's salary of a normal Cuban. And you have also some doctors, military, like the official of the regime that can get some access. Then you have a local network, isolated, an intranet from the internet that is available for the students sometimes at the university. But it's a very difficult, actually, system.
And is that going to open up?
I mean, basically, why the internet is not open? It's not the fault of the embargo. It's not the reason is not because there is technical issue. It's a decision by the government because they believe, in a way, in the same way that the Chinese, that if you open the internet, you cannot keep your system. And they don't have the money, and they don't have the the ecosystem that exists in China, that you can have a very big internet within being open to freedom of expression and freedom of the press. So for now, the internet is not really open for the common people in Cuba. I met somebody that came to Havana to try to access the internet. So he had to come for a very faraway city just to try to send an email. You see the reality of the situation. I mean, this week I was in Cuba until yesterday. At the same time, it might change. It might change through smartphone. It might change through new way of accessing the internet. And the question for Cuba, like it is for Iran or for, of course, China and for other countries, is how you can keep an internet open and a dictatorship, because Cuba is still a totalitarian regime.
Christophe Ventura?
Well, I think anyway, the Cuban government has always submitted all the political questions regarding with liberty, public party pluralism, etc., to the question of the embargo and to the question of its relationship with the US. So I suppose that it makes parts of the process right now, and I think that things will change. With what is happening now.
The embargo has no link with the freedom of the press, as far as I know.
No,
right?
No,
I mean, the embargo is like the myth.
I think
embargo means what? You cannot make on. First of all, the first big economics that deal with Cuba, it's the United States. So for very many subjects, many products, the embargo doesn't exist, and the embargo doesn't exist with Brazil, with China, with Russia. So if you want to make so it's the embargo. It's a pure fiction that the leftists
point of view very well known and in some way easy, because in the same time what you don't say is that, for example, the cost of the embargo is well known. It's 100.
No, but this is propaganda.
Billions. No.
This is propaganda.
It is not.
That's not the reason why the agriculture is not functioning.
But if I can finish, because I think obviously the situation of the internet in Cuba is not good. Who can say it's good? Nobody. But
it's not the American that are in the...
What is the irony in this story, that you are developing exactly this point of view that the internet is restricted in Cuba, which is true. But the irony is that we are saying that today here, when you have another model of the internet where everybody has a full access, but a full control access.
Yes, it's true that France is a little bit like Cuba.
We have just finished to have a law on the control and the mass surveillance.
This is
people.
crazy to say that.
It is not good too. So
ask any Cuban about that, and you will see.
On the one side and the bad ones on the other one. And that's what Obama has understood.
I think freedom.
So you should understand too.
No.
Yes.
Well, I think there is no question that Cuba is a totalitarian regime, and that it's not even on discussion. So I don't even understand why we're discussing this. But a very important point. I mean, if I may switch to something else, which is very key very important to understand, that you mentioned soft power. Cuba is a very important and it's a diplomatical superpower. Cuba has created links first in the 60s with Latin America, and has trained lots of guerrillas and has very close links to Latin American leaders now. I mean, I don't have to name them, but many of them. Then it was imposed itself as a leader of the third world. In Africa, its influence is huge, only for the reason that it sent in the 70s and the 80s many soldiers in Angola to make the war.
Sent medical doctors recently to help
also
fight
this.
That's part of
And
the strategy.
it has historical links with the Muslim world, not least because it trained and this is only in my book, also in our book, it trained the PLO, some of the PLO leaders in the training camps near Havana. And then it has all its partnerships with its traditional Cold War countries like Russia, like China, like Vietnam, and now la cerise sur le gâteau. I don't know how
the cherry on the cake.
The cherry on the cake comes the Western European countries and
President Hollande.
President Obama. And then Hollande is trying, of course, to say that
Beyond
he's
the
the origin of all this thaw. But of course, we all know that it's not the case.
Pascal Drouot, are you rooting for a meeting between Francois Hollande and the retired Fidel Castro?
Well,
there's speculation over whether that'll happen.
I don't know, in fact, but I know that.
But come on, tell us personally. How do you feel? Would you like to see a meeting between the two?
Why not? Why not?
I don't want.
I think it would be a bit ridiculous.
It would be
actually.
Why not? Because we are in the symbol. But that's not the point. The point is the posture of France in the Caribbean. And sure, as Axel said, Cuba has many international weight and weight in Latin America. So for Francois Hollande, asking for lifting of the embargo is costing nothing, because that's the posture of France and of the international community since 1991. It's costing nothing. That's a political posture. And for sure, this visit, this trip, is a political posture
with a lot of business leaders in tow.
Well, yes, but business will grow up when all the economical conditions will permit this. We are talking, when we are saying talking about business, do you know that the economical exchange with Cuba, between France and Cuba, are about $250 million? It is nothing. So that's not the point today.
And in front of that,
the posture.
And in front of that, you have 2 million people in the US that are from Cuban origin. Half of them were born in Cuba, and they are au taquet, as we say in French, ready to go.
They're in the starting block.
And what are expecting a lot of international corporate firms in Cuba is the market in itself. 11 million of people, but also the level of qualification, of education of the people.
But I don't buy that.
Who can work in very high-level sectors like biotechnology.
No, it's not true. It's a pure
health,
fiction.
Etc., who can be very useful for those kind of economical sectors. And I would like to sum up what I think about Hollande. Hollande is going there to develop in the middle and long term an economical diplomacy. That's the first point. But he's also here in the name of the European Union in some way, because the EU is
we don't know that. I mean,
not at all, actually.
Actually, last year, a process for the discussion, negotiation for an agreement of political dialogue and cooperation with Cuba, and explicitly this morning, Raúl Castro said, as he said to Renzi in Italy, that he was expecting from France that the country will play its role in order to facilitate this negotiation in the future, because the EU is the second partner of Cuba after Venezuela, with Spain inside. But that's the situation. And as I told you, the situation that we have to understand from here is that Cuba is not waiting for us, that people are running after Cuba today because there are a lot of new players from the new countries, yes. China, Russia, and so on. And Brazil, you speak about Venezuela, you're right, but speak about Brazil, which is he has very important investment, political presence in the Mariel herbal, for example, and so on and so on. So that's what is at stake.
And in spite of all the anti-American rhetorics, I mean, and I completely agree with you, the main partner for the near future will be the Cuban-American business community, because they are Cubans too, and they have links, and they have cousins, and they have friends, and don't never forget that Cubans are very nationalistic people. I mean, they will always prefer to do business first with Cuban Americans. Then, I mean, Americans, the relation between Cuba and America, Cubans know America very well.
It's very close, and so two points on that. First of all, we don't know exactly, because it's not exactly real economy, but we know that the US is already a key partner, and maybe bigger already than Venezuela, because there is that much money in between the two countries. Even with the embargo, because the embargo doesn't work on many food issue and so on. Second point, I'm not sure, and I'm very afraid of that Francois Hollande goes in Cuba with the approval of the European Union. If he would have done that, it would be good. But I'm afraid that in Spain, they are not very happy by that, that he tried. Actually, Europe was dealing with Cuba on a public way, and the US were dealing secretly, and suddenly the US actually were before the EU. And the last point is that Francois Hollande liked Cuba suddenly. I mean, he discovered Cuba. But in the last 2 years, since he is in power, he destroyed every cooperation we had with Latin America, and even with Cuba. Coopération culturelle, the cooperation with the embassy, the number of diplomats we have there. So the Latin America and France is like as small as it never been.
Right. Those who
How you can suddenly go to Cuba and try to do something when in the last 2 years you have done exactly the contrary?
Did you hear this survey about the 30% of the American citizens declare they're willing and they want to go to Cuba if it's open? I mean, 30% of the American people is 100 million people. So if Cuba is going to host 100 million people in the next 10 years, I mean, that would have a much huger impact
than anything else.
Than any French voyage investment or whatever.
Christophe Ventura, would that be a good thing? I know some people say, it'll be the end of those beautiful cars, but the Cubans would like a new car.
Did you ask them?
Yes.
Yes?
Of course. Everybody, if you open the border, if you can go to the US, they will go immediately, whatsoever thinks the pro-Che Guevara people in the left.
And 2 million people have already done that, actually.
This morning I heard on the radio that in the French radio, that the Cuban didn't want McDonald's, for example.
Yeah, but who wants McDonald's?
So I think
McDonald's is ugly.
So I think it gives us also
this is
certain idea
when you eat 1 week in Havana, I've done that. I don't like McDonald's, but it's better than anything you can eat now.
That's a point of disagreement between us.
I agree.
But try to eat in Havana.
For business...
Just a precision, because on the embargo, we have to be clear. It's true that Cuba can buy to the US some food, especially, but that's the only country in the world, I suppose the only one, who has to pay cash in dollars what they buy to the US.
But why?
And so
why?
So
what about Brazil? What about Russia? What about China?
No, that's not the same cooperation, and it has pushed Cuba to to invest in the tourism, to have dollars in order to pay that kind of thing. So it's also a responsibility of the US to have participate to that kind of tourism that we critiques for good reason. For example, for the behavior of people who are coming here for girls or boys or whatever. But I think that was also part of the secondary consequence of the decision of the US to organize that kind of trade between the two countries.
All right, and Cuba's president, Raul Castro, this weekend, giving hope to those who pray for a breakthrough. Listen to what he said after he paid a courtesy call to the Pope.
I said that if the Pope continues to talk as he does, sooner or later, I will start praying again and return to the Catholic Church. I'm not kidding. I am a communist. The Cuban Communist Party didn't allow it before, but it's being allowed now. And it's a step forward.
course, the Pope, who's been brokering those talks in
He
part.
will come. The Pope will come in Havana in September.
Yeah.
Yes.
Pascal Drouot.
Yes, well, we know the place of the church in Latin America, in Cuba, and for sure the theology of the liberation, the idea of the church in the 60s and 70s, for sure was very attractive for Cuba. So I understand what Raúl Castro said about the Pope.
So there can be a marriage of faith and communism. We're going to leave it there. There's so much more to talk about, though. I want to thank you, Pascal Drouot. I want to thank as well Frédéric Martel, Axel Gliden, and Christophe Ventura. Stay with us, though, gentlemen. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we were talking a little while earlier about that. We were talking a little while earlier about that front cover. Gentlemen, please. We were talking a short while ago. Debate continues. We're with Emma James. Hello, Emma.
Hi.
We were talking about a while earlier that front cover of Libération and showing Francois Hollande as Che Guevara.
Yes, lots of words being used to describe this visit to Cuba: historic, economic, strategic. But really, there's one image that seems to have captured the imagination, and it is the front page of Libération today, which has a mock-up of Francois Hollande as Che Guevara and calls Cuba the island of the reunion. It's got plenty of people talking. If we take a look at BuzzFeed, they've actually put together a sort of handy guide as to what the kind of response was to this front page earlier on today from guests that were appearing on French television news. Olivier Besancenot, who's a far-left political figure, said, "You want to kill him a second time?" talking about Che Guevara. He denied there was any political common ground between these two. Alexis Corbière, again, much the same. He's from the Parti de Gauche. He said there was nothing to compare between these two men. But what of the man himself, Francois Hollande? Well, according to Le Point journalist Charlotte Chaffanjon, she said she spoke to him about the front page of Libération. He has seen it. She's tweeted this morning, thought it was a good likeness, but doesn't see that there's any particular affiliation there between the two of them.
All right, no particular affiliation. And of course, we were talking about it earlier in our discussion. What to do, the fact that Francois Hollande is not going to be meeting with dissidents.
Absolutely. The question of human rights is a huge one when it comes to this visit. And if we take a look at Rue 89, has actually unearthed an old article going back to 2003 that Francois Hollande himself wrote. And they're asking, is he going to have the courage to stand up for what he said back in 2003. Now, the old article is here, and in it, he basically condemns the US embargo, but he also condemns the Cuban regime itself as a whole. And what Rue 89 is pointing out is that nothing that much has changed since. In the reign of Raúl Castro, we're still seeing bloggers and dissidents being jailed. Now, in this article, which was entitled "The Beautiful Revolution Turned into a Nightmare, Tell the Truth," Francois Hollande said that in the name of the ideals of the left, it's all rather grand and pompous, this article, we must demand the release of all political prisoners and the abolition of censorship. So, of course, if he's saying that on record in 2003, what this newspaper is saying is he should be saying it again now. He's got the ideal opportunity. He is in front of the leadership there. But this writer says, after the visits to Saudi Arabia and Qatar, it's very clear that Hollande's diplomacy is economic above all else.
And we saw that headline a lot about economic diplomacy. It's been making the rounds. Another story that I know you're following for us, and that is politicians who refuse to ride off into the sunset.
Absolutely. It's not the biggest surprise from the UK general election that Nigel Farage has decided actually he's not going to give up his position at the top of the UK Independence Party. They actually, relatively speaking, had quite a good night. They got more than 4 million votes. But because of the way the system there works, that meant just the one seat. And the one seat that was won wasn't Nigel Farage's. And he had always said, if I don't win my own seat, South Thanet in Kent, then I will step down as leader of UKIP. But today, he tried to hand in his resignation. The party has rejected it. And so that is, I mean, within the last few hours, really, he's been talking about the fact that he's no longer going to be stepping down. Politics.co.uk says this shows he's just as slippery as any other politician. Because on election night, a lot of people were saying to him, come on, really, are you going to stand down? You've done so well with this party. And he kept saying, yes, yes, absolutely, I am out of my word. But as the evening wore on and it became clear that maybe he wouldn't win his seat, he started to change his language a little bit. And they talk about the fact that he said he was going to take the summer off and think about his options, because the leadership battle wasn't expected to happen until September anyway. So he was talking about taking the summer off, and then maybe I'll run for the leadership. We'll see how it all goes. Now, there's been quite a bit of reaction online to this. Jamie Ross tweeting, I'm campaigning for a 3-day mini break to be renamed Farage, as in I'm off for Farage in Cornwall. Kevin Maguire, who is the associate editor of the Daily Mirror, which is a Labour-affiliated newspaper, says, Nigel Farage, the Freddy Krueger of British politics, if a little scarier. You think he's gone, but he hasn't.
Oh, that's not very nice. All right. Many thanks for that, Emma. I want to thank our panel once again for joining us. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.